So when did you first start getting tattooed? How did that journey begin for you?
My sister's first husband was a street tattoo artist. And I thought it was super cool. He had like a homemade gun. He had tattooed my sister a number of times. That's kind of how they met. And I'd always wanted a tattoo. I don't remember why or how. And when I look back, I can say it was definitely a sort of young-ish or infantile-ish idea. I wanted a chain of daisies around my ankle. I don't recommend getting a tattoo on your ankle because it's a very painful place to get a tattoo. And I never actually did get that little chain of daisies. However, I did get a tattoo with that homemade gun. As my sister snuck it out of her boyfriend's tattoo case when he was out one day and gave me my first tattoo, which was a small black cat with my name over it in sort of a cursive script. Unfortunately, since I was my sister's first pincushion, she went a little too deep. So it raised the letters and it was a little murky looking. And it was pretty small. It's on my left upper shoulder. And I was 19 when I got it. I never really thought about it. Just, it was one of those little things I had. I also got my nose pierced when I was pretty young, like when I was 18, which was pretty subversive for Wisconsin at that time. And then one day at work, I was wearing a short sleeve shirt and one of my bouncers came up to me and said, "Oh my God, when did you do time?" And I was like, "What?" He's like, "When were you in prison?" I said, "Excuse me, what?" He said, "That's a total prison tat." And I was like, "Oh my God, no, it's not. I'm getting that covered up immediately." And I got it covered up when I moved to San Francisco. But to stay within the frame of it, I've always thought my name was special because we can talk about being self-centered and egotistical. And I got a cover up of it that was still my name, Carmen, but then it was in flames. And then later on, when I was working with my current tattoo artist, the one who's done the majority of my work, he looked at it and said, "We're going to cover that up." And I was like, "It's already a cover up of a cover up." So it's been covered up now 3 times, but you can still run your hand over it and feel where the original is. So I think there's interesting layers of evolving consciousness that happen with the reclamation of that part of my body, my identity, and who I am. And now it's a dragon and flames and cherry blossoms.
Mm, awesome. Awesome. And you're covered in such beautiful ink. Do you want to say more about types of tattoos you have, and any specific ones that you want to speak on more?
Sure, sure. My first tattoo that's a significant piece is on my arm, and it says, "Until I die, he will not leave my side." And it's the last line of the poem Elegy that Dylan Thomas wrote for his father after he died. So when my best friend died, he was 32 and I was 34. And we were both sober and we had met in recovery and we were just thick as thieves. And I had known a lot of people through my recovery experience who had a lot of tattoos. And somebody, I don't even know whom, had told me about someone else who had died in a really tragic accident. My friend died in a very tragic accident. He was hit after a meeting up in Noe Valley in San Francisco on a scooter by an ambulance headed off to General. Didn't hear it coming through the intersection and just ended up being in the ICU for a week in a coma before he was finally pulled. And I was there every day, hours and hours and hours, from the visiting hours until well past sometimes. And I knew I needed to get a tattoo to commemorate him.
Mhm.
And when I had a year sober, he had thrown me a sobriety birthday party and he filled his loft in the dog patch with French tulips, which are his favorite flowers. So it
Mm.
also has French tulips, 2 of them, one for each of us. And that's script. And when I walked into Mom's Tattoo in the Haight, my tattoo artist, Barnaby Williams, walked over, picked me up in this big old bear hug, gave me a huge hug, and said, "You're here for Shadrach." And I burst into tears. And he said, "What do you want me to do for you?" And I told him, and like a good tattoo artist, he made it much bigger than I thought it was going to be. And there was something about the process of it, sitting through the emotional pain, the experience of the physical pain. Uh, I'm sorry, there's some background noise. My cat is playing with some cardboard in the back.
Perfect.
And it helped to sort of anchor the amorphous emotional pain that I was feeling into one spot. And there
Mm,
was something too about the experience of it healing, talking to people. Barnaby told me a story about a commemorative tattoo he had. And then I found other people who would tell me stories about theirs, people who had, recovery symbols on themselves or memorial symbols or dates. And so, yeah, commemorative tattoo was really my first big piece.
mm,
And that sort of set me off on a wild, wild ride of getting tattoos. My next piece was a dragon from my elbow on my right side, all the way up my shoulder, and then onto my chest plate. And then I got another dragon on the other side. I have a number of different hearts because I wear my heart on my sleeve as a my former lovers. I have a jackalope, a pink jackalope, which is a one that I got in Paris at Abraxas Tatouage in the Marais district. Barnaby was living there. I had moved to Paris for a while to become an artist. Nothing says good times like being a starving artist in Paris. Really, really nothing does. But having a tattoo artist as a roommate, when I turned 40, he gave me this jackalope tattoo. And I got my daisies then. They have little Marguerite daisies on the tattoo. And one of my favorite thoughts about this is that Barnaby said, "Okay, so we're going to color it brown." And I said, "No, I want it pink." And he was like, "Well, jackalopes aren't pink. Carmen, jackalopes are brown." I said, "Barnaby, jackalopes aren't real. So if I want it pink." And he's like, "Good point. We'll make it pink." And that for me was a feeling of, and I looking back, I think I was desperately trying to root myself in some of my own family mythology.
mm.
My father had given me a brown velvet bunny bank. I don't know if you've ever seen them. I think they came out in like bank promotionals at some point in like the 70s. And I had gotten one for my dad, and I don't know where it went, but one day I was in Oakland walking around, and I saw in a little pop-up children's store, and it was a brown velvet jackalope bunny bank, which I still have. And so I based the tattoo off of that. And so 40 felt like a milestone for me,
Mhm.
trying to make my way in Paris as a writer, and a way to kind of link back to connection with my father. Yeah, I have a lot more. Like, I can tell you stories about all of them.
What is you're still working with the same artist, it sounds
Yeah.
like for now many years.
Mhm. Yes, yes.
What's the relationship like with him and the collaborative process? I really love the story you told about the commemorative tattoo, and how is
Mhm.
it to keep working with him over all these years?
Well, it's someone who's witnessed me. He's deeply witnessed me. He saw me come into recovery. I met him probably when I was in my first 30 or 40 days of being sober. I'm sober. I've been sober for 17 and a half years. And he saw me come in just as a complete train wreck. I was 32 when I got sober. I was 34 when Shadrach died. That started me off. I was 35 or 36 when I got my first dragon. And then these things grew. And a relationship grew. And I I remember being at this crossroads in my life when I was about 38, 39. I think I just turned 39. And Barnaby had moved to Paris. Barnaby's tattooed all over the world. He's one of the top 100 tattoo artists in the world. He used to own Mom's. Now he's at East Bay Tattoo. He's worked at Castro Tattoo. He's worked at Abraxas in Paris. I forget the places he's worked in Tokyo. But he has a very definitive kind of style. And my dragon seeds are freehand, which always shocks me because they're very detailed. Um, and I remember someone being like, "Oh, you're going to Barnaby. He's got a really heavy hand." And I was like, "Great." But he's fast. And he's a storyteller, a bit like me, I think. And so we just talk about whatever's going on in our lives. And he had been in Paris, and I hadn't seen him. I had been through all sorts of iterations in my career at that point. I'd been a nanny for a while. I was working at a bicycle shop selling, you know, bicycles, handmade bicycles. And I ran into Barnaby on the street outside of the women's building. And he said, "Carmen!" And he picked me up and gave me a bear hug. And I was like, "Barnaby, what's up? What are you doing? Are you visiting? Are you moving back?" And he said, "No, I'm still in Paris, bloody blah." And he said, "What's going on with you?" And I said, I think I'm going to quit my job and travel and take photos and write." And he said, "Cool. You want to live with me in Paris?" And instead of being like, "Ah, ha, ha," or whatever, Barnaby, I just said, "Okay." And he lit up. It looked like he was glowing. And I was like, wow, okay, I think that was the right decision. And we talked about it. And then he said, "Well, I'll be back in July." And then we talked about it some more. And then, yeah, the next thing you know, I was like getting on an airplane with a roll-on suitcase and my bicycle and a bike box. And I moved to Paris. I didn't have a job. I didn't have a lot of money. I didn't actually have a visa that could have let me be longer than a tourist. And so Barnaby sort of took me under his wing at that point. He was making money as a tattoo artist. I was, dog walking, house sitting, nannying, tutoring. I did a lot of odd jobs in Paris, let me tell you. So our relationship has grown as this kind of friendship. And he witnessed me in all sorts of jobs. When I couldn't make it in Paris anymore, he loaned me the money to get back to San Francisco. The only time I've taken out a personal loan from someone in my recovery, and paid him back immediately. I was like, "Can't handle owing you money." And we've just always stayed friends, and he lives with his partner and their 2 kids in Oakland, and they're thinking about going back. And so it's just a witnessing. And it's very special because he's seen me through all sorts of rough things. And I feel like I can, there's something therapeutic also about getting a tattoo, which I think you're aware of. And I wouldn't say he's my therapist, although there's this sort of relationship between us that I can tell him what's going on. And he's shared things with me. In fact, he ended up being in my dissertation a number of points. And he was there. He was there at my defense. So that was really special.
Speaking of that, your amazing PhD research, which I also got to see at your defense and hear about and sort of witness you along the way in that process. Tell us about your research and how getting tattooed can help us heal from trauma.
It's been a interesting journey. I just graduated last week, which was a little surreal because it was kind of the hybrid Zoom in-person reception. Me and a friend hooded each other in the 6th floor in the somatic arts space classroom. So weird. But I decided to get a PhD. I think I'd always wanted one. Yeah, who doesn't want to be Dr. Martinez?
Yeah, exactly.
One of my clients signed off recently and said, "Thank you so much, Dr. Martinez." And just about fell out of my chair. I'm like, That's me. I did it.
You did. So good.
But I had an experience. So I get a star tattoo every year of my sobriety. So now I have 17 stars, and I think it was star number 12. It was 11 or 12. I always forget which one. And I was in my master's program at CIS in the Integral Counseling Weekend program for psychology. I had a trauma professor who I really resonated with, Joe T. Rao, and we were reading Bessel van der Kolk. And there was something about the way he was describing trauma and ways of like sort of working through it through the body. And I had gone to get my star. And at that point, Barnaby wasn't available. So I went to Danny Boy up at Let It Bleed on Polk Street. And it hurt in a way that it hadn't hurt before. And I remember thinking, that's interesting. This feels different. And there was something about that sort of confluence of being in that space, becoming a psychotherapist, looking at trauma, looking at my own trauma, starting to have like a space where I was talking about it more. And it just sparked this idea. And I'm like, I wonder if I'm getting tattoos to deal with my own traumas. And that opened up this really interesting path. And I talked to GOT about it. I wrote about it. I thought about it. I blogged about it. And I just sort of always kind of held it up in my head. And then I was talking to my law and ethics professor or last class, and I said, hey, what did you mean when you said I should go get a doctorate? Because I'd get my doctorate at about the same time I get licensed. I actually got licensed quicker than I got my doctorate. But she said, well, Carmen, I know your story, and you're going to be of more service to the world and to your community if you get a doctorate. And I was like, no pressure there. Thanks. And she said, good luck, Dr. Martinez. And I was like, and everyone I talked to about this idea said the same thing. And I was looking at doing East-West psychology, and I was told, nope, that's not a good fit. George Kitch suggested I check out the Transformative Studies department. And I had an interview with Kathy Littles, and I told her, she's now the provost.
Yeah.
I told her about my ideas. I had another idea, and she said, I've never heard of this about tattoos before. I'm really intrigued. And then everybody said the same thing. And I went into it thinking I was going to do a study about people that I'd met in recovery who had full body tattoos, and their trauma stories. And that I was going to look at how tattoos are used to reclaim the body after trauma, specifically sexual abuse trauma. Now, what ended up happening is I found out while I was in the program that probably wasn't going to fly with the ethics board because of eliciting someone's trauma, and that I was going to have to rethink my idea of a study, or I might get stuck having to go through that process again and again. And I was like, I'm not ready to do that. At the same time, I was in another class and I wrote a paper, and I had someone say, well, Carmen, this is pure evocative autoethnography. And I said, huh? What is that? And she said, well, it's what I'm writing my dissertation on. And she started telling me about it. We had a Zoom call. And the next thing you know, I started working on evocative autoethnography. So my dissertation title is What Can Healing from Trauma Look Like? The Transformative Tattoo. Actually, that's backwards. I did it backwards. It's called The Transformative Tattoo. What Can Healing from Trauma Look Like? And it is an evocative autoethnography about healing sexual abuse trauma by reauthoring the body with tattoos. So what happens with abuse, and I'm sure you know this as you yourself are a psychotherapist, right? Especially around childhood abuse or childhood sexual abuse, is that the child is trapped. The child doesn't have a choice, and you're trapped in your body. And so there's a lot of disassociation. And I pulled heavily from Van der Kolk, pulled heavily from Gabor-Mate, but Peter Levine, Judith Herman, the classic trauma, theorists, attachment theory with Dan Siegel. Oh my God, The Developing Brain. Please read it if you haven't read it. Amazing, amazing, amazing. And really started looking at how traumas work through. And then researching tattoo literature. I mean, tattooing is an art that's been around for over 5,000 years. It is not new. There's commemorative tattooing. There's tons of research out there on that. Research around spirituality and tattooing. And that there was this, what I might call, even though after doing research, I don't think it's actually a niche, but I'll call it a niche amount of literature around women and get tattoos. First, it was around women tattooists. So tattooing was a pretty patriarchal, male dominated, still is very male dominated
Mm-hmm.
art form.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, women started sort of infiltrating into that. Well, the painted ladies first, the circus and that sort of situation. But then there was these through lines that I was reading about how women would come into a tattoo shop who'd been sexually abused, and they would get a tattoo, and they would retake that part of their body. And that's where my research led me, where at some point I realized I was unconsciously reclaiming parts of my body that I had been forced to hold still, specifically my arms. And I wrote a paper called "You Can't Hold a Dragon Down," and that, not only are tattoos a way of like reclaiming and resurfacing the body, reauthoring, that tattoos become a kind of armor, right? If we look at the female body as being, the male gaze, all right, and the perpetration of the male gaze on the female body, that tattooing has become an armor. And so I literally have flying winged creatures on my arms that have armored scales and breathe fire. Now, granted, mine also breathe cherry blossoms because I'm a little, a little lot femme, and I love pretty flowery things, but they're fierce, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, you will never be able to hold me down again. And that empowerment. I was literally in a trauma workshop with Russell Van der Kolk pre-pandemic, and he was talking about PTSD and how it gets trapped in our body systems, and that it's because the body can't move. And he used the example of victims in Katrina who had been flown out, but they flew them out by stacking them on cots in big military planes, and they were strapped in. So they had gone through this horrendous trauma. They've been rescued from
Oh my goodness.
the hurricane, only to be tied down in a large plane and then carried off into the night. So the trauma is nowhere to go. Now, what's interesting is that a lot of them got commemorative Katrina tattoos. And at the lunch break, I'm with a mentor and a woman that I've done a lot of work with, and we're talking, and my whole body just flushed. And I was like, oh my God, that's what I did. I got tattoos where I was held down, my arms, my chest, my neck. And that's where I decided to get a back piece. So I'm in the process of right now working on a back piece with Barnaby. So that's a little bit about my dissertation. I could talk about it all day long. I don't know how much you want to hear that.
That Carmen, thank you so much for sharing all of that. I know I've heard some of this before, and of course I was there for your defense, but hearing it again and hearing it as part of your story and is so powerful. And it's really a part of so many women's stories, I think, who are reauthoring their bodies and reclaiming, agency over not just their bodies overall, but different parts of their bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you and I in this moment are not specifically talking about Twin Peaks, but I keep thinking as you're talking all about Twin Peaks, because it is about sexual trauma and healing from, and thinking about the lasting impact of that. Right? What is the lasting impact of trauma on the body, on the mind, on the spirit, and what to do with that? Where does it go? Your question about the folks from Katrina, like, where does it go? How do we move it? What has to happen? So I just appreciate everything you're saying so much. And I'm wanting to ask you, when you are getting tattooed, when you're on the table, where do you go? What happens sort of holistically for you, mind, body, spirit, during that process?
Well, it feels like a kind of meditative state, right? I recently had a client talk about his tattoos and how it helps him to just kind of be present but not be there. he doesn't feel the pain of it. And oftentimes, there's a physiological experience of, you get adrenaline, you get endorphins, you stop feeling the pain, although there is something called hopping the fence. And that's when you do start feeling the pain, and boy, does it hurt. And my tolerance is about 3 hours. But I pray. I say a prayer on a loop in my head. I say the serenity prayer. It's kind of a classic prayer. And I do a focal point somewhere, and I just sort of fall into that focal point. And sometimes I think about maybe the person around who I might be thinking, part of my experience with tattoos is I went through a really devastating heartbreak, and I started getting tattoos around that, and, reintegrating those parts of myself that had felt so hurt and so sad, and just being like, I'm opening myself up to this pain, but also like allowing it to be integrated, the emotional pain again in the physical body. So I just, yeah, I pray, I talk to God, my version of God. I don't, the Judeo-Christian version of God is not my God. That's not the God I'm talking about, but it's just an acronym: good orderly direction, grace over drama. Sometimes I call it great outdoors because I am affinity with nature. But this idea of something outside of myself that is holding me in the experience. And then there's a piece of art there. It's beautiful. It's I like aesthetics. I know we're on a podcast, but I'm in full makeup. And that there's a narrative, there's a story, and it becomes a part of my own mythology and my own makeup, and that process. And then afterwards, I won't lie, you get a little endorphin rush. It's like, wow, this feels great. A little feverish, a little like, woo. But I usually, I find a focal point and I just say a prayer. And that's kind of my way in.
That's such a beautiful answer. Thank you. And for me, I think I really resonate with a lot with what you just said. And also for me, it's one of the places where I feel like I can really let go and be taken care of is on that table. And I think it's in part when I have found artists that I really believe in and trust, and there's a deepening that can happen there. That doesn't always happen for me if I'm just walking into a shop and meeting someone for the first time and getting a little something. That can be fine and fun, but there's something else that occurs for me when I can really allow myself to open that way, sort of spiritually, and just be taken care of and held. So yeah, I love it. I'm so glad you listened to your law and ethics and I'm glad that you listened to that call to do this research and to go through this transformative process to be able to share it with us in the world, but also like here in this moment. Carmen, it's just, you're so magical. I can't even deal. So we know this podcast is about Twin Peaks specific tattoos. Yes. So what are your thoughts around why someone, me, many of us listening, would want to get tattoos of our favorite TV show, whether it's Twin Peaks or something else?
Well, I have a lot of ideas about that, some of which I was like, well, I'd have to, do I need to do research to do this podcast? It's like,
no,
it's community, it's chosen family of choice versus family of origin, right? And how we don't always get to choose our family systems. It's fairy tale. I think I shared with you before that I actually wrote a paper in my undergraduate about Twin Peaks as a fairy tale, specifically a Sleeping Beauty. And this was back in the days where you wrote a paper on a typewriter. You had the little like correcting tape, and I was like typing my little, I don't even remember what it was, a selector or something. Who knows? I have no idea. And I remember I got my undergraduate at UW-Madison and thinking about Twin Peaks, I didn't watch it when it first came out. My family background is pretty poverty-stricken, scarcity, and I started working when I was really young. I think my first job was when I was 12. So when Twin Peaks came out, I remember kids in high school talking about it, And I remember noting the ones who were talking about it. I remember this one boy, Chad. Now, Chad wasn't exactly a popular guy, but he was kind of cute and he was tall. He had dark hair. Let's see, he looked a little like Dale Cooper. And oh my God, man. Oh, but I had a crush on him from Dune. So again, dating myself. But
He's a dreamboat. I mean, you can't not.
seriously, yum. And I just remember being like, huh, Chad watches Twin Peaks. I wonder what this is about. Right. But I was already working and I was working nights quite often. Um, even in high school I was working nights. So I didn't really catch into it. And then when I was in my undergrad, I dropped out, went back to school when I was 25, and I was in a film class. And in that film class, I was learning about film, and I was learning about, I'm probably one of the few people who saw The Matrix on the big screen. And oh my gosh, I remember my film teacher telling us to go see that, having to do a project. And I was at Four Star Video Heaven off of State Street in Madison. And I was just like, what am I going to write on? And I don't know what I want to write on. And blah, blah, blah. I thought about doing Dead Ringers. And I was like, and I was walking up and down the aisle, and there it was, Twin Peaks and VHS. And I was like, ew, I should do that. Now, at the same time, I'm coming into a very interesting time in my life where I was leaving a long-term relationship. It was a very tricky relationship. I was in transition with work. I was, I think, in some ways, managing and controlling my drinking at that point by overworking and over schooling and overworking out, all sorts of things. I worked full time. I was in school full time, and I was working on a black belt in Shaolin, which I like to overachieve apparently. Anyways, I must have scooped up the first, all of them. I was like, give me them all. And they're like, can't check out that many. I was like, fine. And I was living on Willie Street and just fell into watching all of them deeply for this paper. And then I came across the paper, and I still to this day don't know who wrote it, but it was a paper based on the Sleeping Beauty fairy tale. And I'm probably going to say the name wrong. There's the Grimm fairy tale, which I think we're all familiar with, but like most of the fairy tales coming out of that time period were a lot darker, really dark, And there was a Italian writer, Giambattista. I'm gonna look it up. Ballet. I pulled it up earlier, and he wrote a fairy tale around Sleeping Beauty not being awakened by the prince, but by her father sexually abusing her, where in the sleep where her father tries to protect her, and she becomes pricked by the needle that ends up putting her to sleep. At some point, seeing her in her beauty, sexually abuses her. And not only this, but she ends up having twins, like gives birth, goodness. Like all of this craziness. And so this idea that Twin Peaks has that, starts to come forward is, she is Sleeping Beauty and she's being sexually abused by her father. And this is something that's not being talked about in society. But the way that it was crafted, I think, in the show is in putting it through the lens of a fairy tale. It allows it to be talked about.
Exactly.
It's magic, it's circus, it's dark, it's goth, it's a little noir. It has all of these different elements to it that begins to have a language of commonality between people that I think we're really desperately trying to connect and be able to talk about these really subversive topics. And so, of course, if I think about tattooing as a way of reclaiming the body after sexual abuse, how many people out there were getting Twin Peaks tattoos because that was part of the landscape of that show? Completely makes sense to me. Or we could just be like, I just fanned out on, the whole thing, But it was a really dark thing to start to have in like national TV, but I think it opened up this conversation that people were probably needing to have all the time,
Exactly.
weren't being able to talk about. Yeah. And I remember being in a library, Carol, reading this fairy tale, reading this paper, having just watched a ton of Twin Peaks, having my own experience of sexual abuse and incest in my family system, and going through a really challenging point in a relationship that I was soon to break up out of. And it was just like, woof. I just remember that feeling. It was like, it was very, very dark, but there was also some relief, like, oh, I'm not alone. And what was funny when I was thinking about this podcast too, is like, I think you had said, if I don't have any Twin Peaks tattoos. You're like, well, what would you get? And then I was like, well, my first one was just like, well, obviously I would get Laura Palmer wrapped up in plastic. I mean, it's beautiful. It's the Sleeping Beauty, but I'm also, I was like, everybody has that tattoo. Not everybody has that tattoo, but lots of people do actually, if you Google that. And I was like, well, I'll get a cup of coffee. And I was like, well, a lot of people have that one too. And I really like some of the graphics of Twin Peaks. And there's a lot of that too. But then I remembered I wrote a poem. I'll have to dig it up somewhere and send it to you. But I wrote a poem about living in One-Eyed Jack's house.
Wait, what?
Yes.
Say more.
I totally forgotten it. So in that time period, I started doing a lot of spoken word and a lot of performance poetry and poetry slams. They're really big in Madison, and I'd say the late 90s, early 2000s. And I had written a ton of poems. And one of them was about One-Eyed Jack, living in the house of One-Eyed Jack. And that was like, oh, that's my tattoo. Because the One-Eyed Jack is the wild card. And if anything, I think I've always been the wild card in my family, the wild card in my classes, the wild card and as a therapist. I'm like, hi, here's your tattoo therapist with, purple hair this week and pink next week. And so I was like, yeah, if I got a Twin Peaks tattoo, I get a One-Eyed Jack.
That's such a good answer. I love it. How do you bring tattoo discussions into your therapy practice, Carmen?
Well, a lot of it started with my own awareness around some of the research I did first around commemorative tattooing. Like I'd done a lot of research early in my research around commemorative, because that seemed to there was a lot of literature out there. And people have that. I have a client who has a commemorative tattoo of his favorite dog. And also that some of the ashes from that dog are actually in the tattoo. And that's not an atypical thing for people to do, is to have ashes from a lost loved one as part of the tattoo. And the first time it happened to me with the client, interestingly enough, who had a Queen of Hearts card tattooed on her arm. And I'd had a moment of reverie in a session with her around what I suspected had always been sexual abuse with her father. And it wasn't, I don't want to go into too deeply into the details here, but there was something about the placement of that tattoo, the significance of the heart, just like being, and now I can be like, oh yeah, she was held on the arm by the father. And I know what the circumstances were. And she was disassociated. She wasn't present. And so I said, hey, I haven't seen that tattoo before. You want to tell me about it? And she started talking about when she got the tattoo and how old she was and what it meant to her and the symbol. And the more she talked, the more she came back into her body, until suddenly she was just completely present with me again. I'm not even sure that she was aware that she had disassociated. And moving forward, I would use that. Not always, but surprised by how many folks have tattoos. I'd read a really fantastic research study about veterans coming back from the Iraq. Um, I don't even know what to call it, just horror,
Mhm.
and how that men, this study was predominantly around men and tattoos, were able to start talking about the trauma they experience by telling their therapist about the tattoo story. And that's what I would do. And so if I have a client who I sense is dysregulated, the window of tolerance is shut, or they've begun to dissociate, I might ask them to tell me the story of their tattoo. In fact, I had one client who literally as we were wrapping up said, "Oh, that was really clever." He's like, "I see what you did." And I'm like, "Thanks, I'm glad that you noticed that." But it really was this bonding moment, you know. And Nancy McWilliams, I know you know who Nancy McWilliams does something where she talks about, in the initial opening session, she asks a person the origin of their name. Tell me the story about your name. And I think it's the same thing, that we as human creatures like to tell stories. And so a tattoo is a story.
Mhm.
Every tattoo is a story behind it. And so if I can talk to my client, tell me the story of that tattoo. When did you get it? How old were you? What was happening in your life? And a lot of my clients come to the same conclusion without having done a dissertation, that they were using it somehow to deal with the trauma in their life, an emotional trauma, a loss, a grieving piece, a reclamation of body.
Yes. Yes. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. And for me, just adding on to that, it's also about having objects with me all the time that create a sense of like comfort and safety, so that
Mhm.
I can look down at my Twin Peaks tattoos or my Christmas sleeve, I have Mr. and Mrs. Santa Claus, I've got sunflowers and succulents and just things that I can carry with me that bring me joy. And
Mhm.
so those are their own stories, right? And nostalgic pieces. I have like Jim Henson made this sing along for Mother Goose sing along, and I have that rendition of Mother Goose with her little chicklets, or I guess, yeah, goose baby geese. I don't know, what is that word?
Goslings?
Goslings, yes, with her goslings. And I watched that all the time when I was little. My mom would put it on for me to help me get up in the morning because I had a hard time getting up to go to school, and I can look at that and remember that time. And those are just pieces I can carry with me that bring that comfort and safety. And that um I think it's so important that we can hold these objects, remembering certain times, commemorating events, bringing
Mhm.
pieces of nostalgia with us.
Yes,
um
absolutely. There's a beautiful article that talks about children's literature and tattoos. And I was like, oh, I did that too. So it's incorporated into my dragon sleeve on my left side. But originally, it was a commemorative tattoo for having gotten 5 years. So before I got this, I started getting the stars when I had 7 years. 7 years, 7 stars. I don't know. This doesn't seem relevant. But before that, I got 5 butterflies. And I took the 5 butterflies out of Richard Scarry's book, I Am a Bunny. And it's this really sweet little book about this little bunny that's discovering the world through the seasons, so I was like, oh, and I had been a nanny, and I can't tell you how many times I've read that story to children I've taken care of. And I even had a thought at one point, I was like, well, I'm reclaiming the childhood I didn't get to have, being the parent or the caretaker, and having a kind of reclamation of that own storyline, by caretaking children, and then getting the tattoo overlaying that. So it was just like a really interesting sort of like, oh, I did that before. I was like, when we are unconsciously doing things to heal ourselves through the tattoo process, and then to have it like, to go back and then find literature and be like, oh, see, that substantiates it.
yeah,
Thanks.
see, that's what I've been doing. Yeah. What, if any, annoying questions have people asked you about your tattoos over the years?
Did it hurt? Like, oh, come on. Of course it hurt. Shut up. No, it's a little tiny needle going in and out of your arm really, really fast. Oh, you must have a high tolerance for pain. Actually, you have no idea.
Mhm.
Or the one that I really like the most. Oh, you must like pain. Fuck off. I don't know if I can say that.
You can totally say that. Absolutely. Fuck off. Yep.
I was like, you actually don't have any idea the kind of pain I've gone through. And that's an assumption.
Mhm.
Right. And then of course, even though that tattoos are much more acceptable than they used to be, which again, I find funny since they've been around for over 5,000 years, but that there is sort of still a stigma, especially for women with tattoos. You're
Mhm.
loose, you're sexually active, you're prostitute, you're, yeah. And, or that, this isn't exactly a question, but sometimes that people will just reach out and touch you. It was like, what are you doing? I did not invite you to touch me. Do not do that. You need to ask. I'll show you and I'll talk to you about the tattoos, but please don't touch me. Yeah.
Seriously.
But really, the one that always gets me is, did it hurt? Yeah. Yeah, it did. But you know what? Having control over that pain versus the not being able to control the original pain of the trauma incident is a powerful antidote to helplessness.
Yes. Ooh, really well said, Carmen. I love it. What questions, if any, would you like to be asked about your tattoos?
Tell me the story.
Hmm.
I want to tell you the story. I want to tell you about Shadrach. I mean, he lives with me, and I can always tell that story about. Of course, I was laughed too because later he's like, "Well, they're my favorite flowers, and if I'm going to fill up the house with flowers, and just put my favorite flowers in there." And I'm like, "Of course you are, Shadrach." So it's like, "Why white French tulips?" Because I mean, tulips are lovely, but daisies are my jam. And then when he told me that, I was like, "Oh, that's great." So I always have the stories, and every time I tell the story, it's like I'm honoring that memory
Hmm.
and that experience, and or telling the story about my jackalope, or telling the story about the dragons, or any of the tattoos I have. When someone tell me about that, why that, or where did you get it? I also like because I have tattoos I've gotten in New York, I have tattoos I've gotten in Paris. Um, I have tattoos, many that I've gotten here in San Francisco or in Oakland, since Barnaby's over in the East Bay right now. But to be able to like, it's a bibliography, an autobiography. It's a kind of like way of chronicling my life. Yeah, that would tell me the story would probably be the question I'd be like, yeah, absolutely. Let me tell you about that.
If and when there is a season 4 of Twin Peaks, which we can only hope or imagine that there would be, what what character, either existing or new, would you want to play?
I, mm, I don't know. It's so interesting. I mean, I always loved Sherilyn Fenn, but I was just like, because I want to look like her. So like that would probably be why. I'm like, she's really pretty. um, I don't know. It's so interesting. Although I love Lynch, and I would be like, make me into a character. I'd love to play myself. What would that look like? Yeah, be a little witchy.
It's the perfect witchiness. I really would want you to be just yourself in season 4, and maybe like, yeah, ancillaryly tied to Audrey,
Yeah,
but you.
yeah, yeah. I
Um,
always loved Audrey. I was just like, and they're that sort of like black and white, good, the bad, the light, the dark. Again, going back to that sort of fairy tale.
you mentioned working on a tattoo right now. What tattoo are you getting worked on, or what's your next one?
I have a back piece that kind of got disrupted by the pandemic. So it's two crows, a cherry blossom tree, and one of the crows is carrying an anatomical heart in its claw. And the former romantic partner I had, we had an inside joke about crows. And there's again, it's a fairy tale, one that I read. I don't know, remember the author, but it's about a vampire who would take girls as victims and but would eat their hearts. And he didn't, because he didn't have a heart. And at some point, one of the girls beguiled him because she was a storyteller. And she cut out her own heart and gave it to him before he could take it. And so they were like symbiotically bound. And so one of the crows, I wrote a poem. It's kind of an epic poem, and ends up being in my dissertation about, the exchange of hearts between lovers and how you always carry a piece of them with you, regardless of whether or not you're still together. And that at that point, I was going through a breakup. And so the back piece had come forward to me, and I was like, oh, when I had that experience at the trauma workshop, I'm like, need to get a back piece. I like the idea again of a winged animal, of flight, of being able to have control of my body in that way, but also that narrative around the crow, the heart, and the cherry tree being a kind of re-experiencing a blossoming and a kind of cycle of death and life and beauty. So I have the full outline on that, and it's partially colored, but I'll probably do some more work on that this summer. And then I'm going to date myself, turning 50 this year.
Yay.
And as I've gotten milestone birthday tattoos now in Paris, I'll be in Paris for my 50th, and I'll go back to Abraxas. So Barnaby won't be at Abraxas, but I've gotten some tattoos by a visiting artist there. His name's Bin. He's from China. He's extraordinary. He's the best bedside manner ever. It feels like someone's just gently stroking your arm. I'm like, how is this so soft? He did Rev, the one that I have on my chest, which means dream in French. And so for my 50th birthday, I will get Je ne regrette rien. I regret nothing, from the Edith Piaf song. So being 50 and not regretting any of the actions I've done in my life. And that will be on the inside of my left arm to sort of mirror back the transforme, which I got when I defended my dissertation, which means transformed. So yeah,
Beautiful.
my next tattoo.
Beautiful mirroring, but that's a little bit of a spicy spot right there.
Oh, yes, yes.
That's a tender, spicy spot. But that's so beautiful, Carmen. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your work with us, your life, some of your life story with us, your wisdom, your brilliance, and just who you are and how you show up is always so transformative and spiritual for me to be witness to you. And I just appreciate everything that you shared. And I couldn't think of anyone that I would I mean, it's like the most perfect guest for this podcast to really go deeper to those places that I think so many of us who love the show can resonate with. Many of us find Twin Peaks because we have lived experience with trauma. It might not be Laura's, right? It might not be, rape from your father and incest and all of that. It might be a myriad of other things, but the hurt, the pain, the suffering, any sort of traumatic experience, we might find ourselves drawn to this show and to the weirdness, to the the darkness, to all of the shadow that's in there because of that. And so I really appreciate this conversation and what you shared that really deepens and enriches my perspective always, to both this show, but also to my relationship to tattoos and to my clinical work. So I just adore you. Thank you so much, Carmen.
Oh my gosh, I'm so grateful that you asked me to do this. But what's your Twin Peaks tattoo?
Oh my goodness. Well, I have a few of them. I have two on my feet. So I have two. I know. What was I thinking? What was I thinking? I did it. I was just getting tattooed by my tattoo artist. She just did this new little one, which is the logo for the podcast, but it's Waldo holding a poker chip. And
yes, poker chip from One Eye Jacks.
Yeah. Exactly. The One Eye Jack poker just got the little chip in it too. And I was just on her table getting tattooed by her, and I recorded her and I talking together for another episode. Nice. But I was remembering back to when she did my feet, and I had to do them in multiple sits because even though they're smaller tattoos, the swelling and just what was it was a lot. I could feel the
Yeah.
needles in this sort of fine little, I don't know,
Mhm.
tendons on my in my foot. It's a
Ooh,
lot. You have feet tattoos?
no.
You're
I
just
had
not gonna
an
do that.
ex-boyfriend who got a foot tattoo, and I saw what he went through. I was like, no, thanks. John, it's John, yours is beautiful, not getting my feet tattooed. Uh-uh. Nope.
It's a lot. It's a lot, but multiple sits really helped. I did the outlines and the shading, and then I came back after they healed for color, which was great. So I have a portal on one foot that is this picture would look nice on your wall, which Laura puts on her wall in Fire Walk with Me and walks through. And then I have the sycamore trees with the red curtains behind it as another portal on the other foot. And, you know, which of course takes people into the lodges and just these kind of other dimensional spaces. And then I have a blue rose with the sort of zigzag background behind it on my left leg, which is done in a traditional style by an artist in Denver who I love, Brandon Huckabee. And then I have by Kim, who did my feet tattoo and my Waldo tattoo. She also did, it's so damn cute, Carmen. It's an owl who's
Uh-huh.
sitting on a piece of cherry pie drinking a cup of coffee.
No.
Oh, it's
Oh my
so
God,
good.
that's brilliant. I love
It's
that.
so good. And the cherries in the pie are so, it's like you can look at them and your mouth waters because you're like, yeah, that's a piece of cherry pie. Like that's incredible how she did that. It's truly magical. It's truly magical. So let me see. Am I missing any? I think that's it. Yeah, right. And Waldo. But I know there's more to come.
Oh, that's the thing with tattoos. It's like, oh, where's the next one gonna
There's
be?
always a next one, right? I just made a list. I don't know if you have this, but I have just a list of my ideas. And over time, I hope to, you know, be checking them or see how they evolve,
Yeah.
right? Like they might change. I might cross something off. I might add something on. And then, or take the idea to the artist and see what they want to do and make it their own and sort of finesse it. And
Yes.
yeah, thanks for asking that question. How can people find you if they want to connect with you?
They can go to my website, carmenmartineztherapy.com. That's Martinez with an S. Although I'm located here in San Francisco. At some point, I will hopefully be putting out a book on my dissertation, maybe doing a tour. Don't know that yet. It's been suggested to me that I do a documentary, so we'll see if that happens. But for the time being, you know, that's the place to find me, be through my website for my therapy.
I want you to do all of those things. I want that. I want the book. I want the documentary. I want all of it. It's amazing. It's amazing. Thank you so much, Carmen.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.